roster changes. I'm gonna say, yeah, 4 or 5 teams reporting making roster covering all things WrestleMania live now. Episode 163 of the Ego Chall Podcast post. All right, testing Twitch 1, 2, 3. Yep, that's good. And by the time I test YouTube, it's probably already delayed. That's funny as fuck. All right, should be good.
All right. Hello and welcome to episode 163 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we have nothing to talk about. Nothing whatsoever is going on in the Call of Duty League. Actually, I think everything is going on in the CDL now. We talked about it on last pod. We're over halfway through the 2025 CDL season, and teams, they feel like the sense of urgency is ticking up a little bit, at least from the reported roster moves that are going down. And we're going to talk about a bunch of them, or a bunch of the rumors at least. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Like you said, there's, as is tradition basically for Ego Chall Podcast, as soon as we ended the show on Sunday, we wake up the next day and reports are starting to fly in, rumors are circulating, and today we actually got some confirmed news, at least on the OpTic front. So a bunch to talk about today.
Yeah, so the biggest news, obviously, is OpTic Texas. We talked about on the last pod. We've been talking about them ad nauseum over the last 4 or 5 pods, it feels like. But they officially announced the release of PRED and the pickup of Huke, which, maybe you think this is December or whatever, but no, it is March 26th. This exact same move happened 3 months ago. And obviously Huke was dropped from OpTic after Major 1. They brought back PRED, who had been on hiatus from the CDL since his release in December. But he is now gone from OpTic. Huke is back with OpTic, and it seems like the roster will be Skies, Shotzi, Dashy, and Huke. And someone said this feels like a 8s roster, or like an S&D tournament roster rather than OpTic Texas's roster. But this has not been the season that OpTic Texas has anticipated or had anticipated coming into the year, of course. And this is where they are now. What do you think of this move? I think we mentioned it. I think we kind of joked about it just because it seemed kind of insane that Huke would be brought back. And I didn't think Huke would be brought back in place of PRED, to be honest. But what do you think about Huke coming back to OpTic now?
Yeah, well, before the Huke news was officially announced today, there was also a rumor floating around that Real could possibly go to OpTic in place of PRED. And I was almost in tears laughing at that when it happened, because I essentially brought that up as like a joke example last episode. And then for that to happen, it made me feel like, wait, am I the source here for these rumors? Like I was hoping that was partially the case, because that would have been funny. But yeah, nonetheless, I think this move, my whole philosophy or thought process around the OpTic roster for the past couple of months and recently really has just been like, it felt like they needed a multi-person change, which I guess technically they've made now by replacing Kenny and
Yeah.
Pred. It just didn't happen at the same time. And my whole thought was like, who are the realistic quote unquote upgrades for Kenny and Pred? Now the Kenny situation, obviously we learned he stepped down and he wasn't performing statistically at up to the caliber of what we have come to know he's capable of over the years. So the question of who's an upgrade for Kenny probably becomes a little easier to answer just from a statistical standpoint there. But the upgrade for Pred, it has been just something that was difficult for me to wrap my head around, because even in the like made up example that potentially had some minor truth to it for an hour or so yesterday of Real replacing Pred, like I didn't view that as a quote unquote upgrade, just because I think Pred is, and he is an all-star player. He's an MVP caliber player, and although we've seen flashes of that from Real, he doesn't have those accolades yet. So I think objectively speaking, it's not crazy to say that Real isn't an upgrade over Pred. That being said, though, with the news today of Huke replacing Pred once again, the biggest takeaway for me is I just feel like everything we have heard over the past couple of months from the OpTic camp about this situation is not the full truth, just because like if everything was, peachy, hunky dory, whatever the phrase you want to say, like there wouldn't be these situations of a player getting dropped and then Pred coming back in. Well, obviously it started with what we were told was personal reasons with Pred and everything like that. So we have no reason to doubt that part of it. But Huke coming into the roster, Huke, seemingly being the best player on the team, then getting dropped in place of Pred because Pred returned to action. And the phrasing was, I feel like the messaging around that was just like, we didn't want to make that move, but we felt like, we had to run it back with the champ squad, blah, blah, blah. And then just a month, 2 months later, the messaging is like, now Karma was on Scump stream today saying like the situation was unsalvageable and we just had to make a change after these the results of this past like set of qualifiers and the minor and major two, all that. So I don't know. I just think it's a really strange situation because I feel like in both cases, when Huke was dropped after major one, I think statistically speaking, it was pretty clear he was the best player on OpTic. And I feel like this past major, although, the team didn't play great overall, Pred was probably statistically the best player on OpTic. So that leads me to just believe that these are changes for outside of game reasons and, in search of chemistry, which we've gone over before. We know Huke and Shotzi have that chemistry, and we've heard all about the connection between Skies and Shotzi and Dashy outside of the game that they're hoping translate to in-game results now. But yeah, I think this is once again, it's the opposite of the way I thought something big could happen with OpTic, where I thought another team could make a big move and that would be the domino to cause multiple teams to make a roster move. Now this move comes in where Huke replaces Pred, and Pred is once again a free agent, and that is the massive domino because now we haven't really heard any concrete information or reports and rumors on where Pred is definitely going at this point. But that's just a major domino that could cause other teams that we haven't heard of yet to make a move. So I do think, the reality of the situation for OpTic is Scump has addressed it and multiple times now over recent watch parties and streams saying like, there's a realistic scenario where OpTic doesn't make champs if they continued to play the way they did at in the major two qualifiers and everything like that. And that's kind of what you alluded to earlier on, the sense of urgency, which isn't really something we've had to see from OpTic teams in the past. They, even my thinking before all this was they were going to stick it out with Kenny and PRED and try and improve with the champs winning squad from a year ago. We saw it with the dynasty and their little blips in the road towards the end of that roster's lengthy time together. Like they wrote it out. They didn't want to make changes, but this is, I mean, I would be, I think maybe in like Black Ops 1, there were a couple iterations of OpTic, but even in Black Ops 1, the OpTic team won at least one event, maybe two. I think Leverage 1-2, OpTic 1-2, and Fear 1-1. I don't remember. But point being, this might be the most roster changes OpTic has ever made in a single season in Call of Duty. If it's not, it's definitely got to be up there. So I'm overall not sure how it's going to play out. I do think what we heard today from like Scump, Zuma, Karma, there are a bunch of clips from them on stream and stuff talking about things. Seems to be the thinking is that Huke and Shotzi are just going to work together better in this game than Shotzi and Pred. Maybe the thinking is just Pred's not as fast as Huke, and Huke and Shotzi can be uber aggressive together. I don't really know the exact thinking, but the end of the day, OpTic did have a 6-1 record in the Major 1 qualifiers. Not the first two matches there weren't with Huke, so I think they were
1-1.
Yeah,
1-1 with Pred before.
Pred,
so
so they were
5-0.
undefeated.
Yeah,
undefeated with Huke. But then Major 1 happens where they struggle in hardpoint at that event, and I kind of alluded to this, but I didn't really, come right out and say it. I think part of my thinking behind there potentially being more to all of these changes is that Huke was off of the team when Kenny was involved, and now Kenny has already been removed from the team and Huke is back. So maybe it was something like Huke and Kenny. There was that one listening on a protocol hardpoint from, I think it was Major 1, where like Kenny said he wanted to rotate and Huke said he was going to hit the hill or vice versa, something like that. And I think people at that time looked at that under a microscope as saying like they didn't work well together, but maybe there is potentially some truth to that in the sense of they thought at that time if they're going to bring Pred back in and get the champ squad back together. Now Kenny isn't a part of this team, and Shotzi, who obviously, as we talked about, is basically an untouchable player on this roster until he decides he doesn't want to be a part of it. You would think Shotzi potentially had something to do with getting Huke back on the team. Obviously, not all him or anything like that, but they've had success together in the past, so it's not the craziest thing to try and connect the dots there and think that they might work well together. So I kind of just ranted for a while there, but I think overall picture for OpTic now, we've seen them at two events this year, that regardless of their records in the qualifiers, which are a complete stark contrast between Major 1 qualifiers and Major 2 qualifiers. They have two top 8 finishes, one event with Huke and Kenny, and obviously I guess the second one has Skies in that equation as well, but that's on playing with Skies on like 2-3 days of practice too. So now third stage, third split, however you want to phrase it, of the 2025 CDL season, we will see the third different roster. Third different roster, or fourth, because Pred Kenny, Kenny Huke, Skies Pred, and Skies Huke. So fourth different iteration of the roster that we're going to see in the third set of major qualifiers. And I just think that's the goal at this point is to, get some practice reps in as soon as possible. I already saw clips of like Huke in the facility scrimming and stuff today. And they just have to see what they're able to do, because obviously the team has the talent and just stuff hasn't been clicking at this point. So going to be interesting to see what they do from here and how they make this work.
So I want to read you the weird history of Huke and PRED. So in the summer of 2023, PRED and Kenny join OpTic, replacing Ghosty and Huke. All right, so PRED replacing Huke, at least in some shape or form, for the first time. Fast forward to December 2024, Huke replaces PRED on OpTic. February 2025, PRED replaces Huke. March 2025, Huke replaces PRED. This has never happened. I can guarantee it. There have never been two players replacing each other on the same exact team this many times, probably in history, but definitely not within the span of 2 years. It's pretty crazy. I saw someone liken it to, Huke is like the old girlfriend. Like she's just so great. Like, you break up with her and you're like, man, I really miss her. And then you go back to her and then you're around for a while and it's like, all right, like let's break up and then we get back together. This is Huke's like fourth time on OpTic, I want to say. Obviously this is his second this season. I think it's been 2 times previous to this. I mean, if you include Empire, it's certainly that. But that's just pretty crazy that this keeps happening. I also think that what you were saying about the messaging, I would, I should preface this by saying OpTic and these players don't really owe anything to the fans, and like, especially with PRED's like personal reasons stuff, like they don't owe that to the fans to say, hey, this is exactly what's going on, here are all of the details. That being said, when you don't put anything out there and you leave it up to people's imagination, they will imagine things, they will speculate things, they will create conspiracy theories that, you say, I'm sure are not flattering. They don't paint a flattering picture of PRED or any of these players. Like even something like Kenny and Huke not getting along, that might not be anything. But at the same time, we don't know. There's been so little transparency as to how a team this talented is so bad, and like why there are so many roster changes. Like the only time in recent memory I can remember OpTic making this many roster changes was when Scump retired mid-season, and it felt like they were scrambling because they had expected to play that entire season with him, and then he retires in like January or February of that year, and everything changes. They have to make changes. Obviously, there were the Rambo and Dashy issues or whatever. That was also a part of that. So there were a lot of roster changes as a result. I haven't seen that kind of, like, at least on the outside, we haven't seen that many issues. We haven't seen like a player retire or anything, but yet there are these roster changes, and I don't think that this team is any better. I would say it's probably worse. Like this 4-man iteration, I would argue, is worse than, on at least on paper, the 4-man coming into the season, because we've seen that previous roster win a world championship, and regardless of Huke and his talent, which is undeniable, and he actually was playing very well. In my opinion, at least, he was playing well before he was replaced by PRED, and I thought that was a weird move to do, and it felt like it was reactionary. It was either reactionary to the one major result, or that was always the plan once they knew that PRED was ready to come back, which felt weird. And I also wonder about, or I guess the other part of that would be that, I'll just say this. It's curious that Huke did not join another roster. So I wonder if he had any sense of, like, maybe if I wait it out, I can get back with OpTic. Like I would imagine there had to have been some interest among other teams. Maybe it just wasn't the right team for him, but I just, like, it's kind of wild that he was available to begin with to bring him back into OpTic this time around. And that leads to my next point. OpTic making these roster changes by releasing Kenny and now PRED, that creates so much talent in the pool now. Like, that puts so much talent into that pool. Like you said, it's kind of a domino, especially the PRED thing. But I think even Kenny, like the allure of a 2-time former world champion being available, and with, like, how he can play different roles if need be, even though he has not played well at all this season, I think that's very appetizing for other teams, and they might actually change their roster when they might not really need to, just to get Kenny into the building, and especially so with Pred, because I think most teams, like the majority of the CDL teams, would take Pred if he was available, and now he is available for the second time this season, and it doesn't feel like there's a possibility of him rejoining OpTic like in the near future, I guess. But that it just seems all super weird to me. It does give off the vibe that OpTic doesn't know what they're doing. Maybe they do. I don't know. Like, I have a hard time believing that they wouldn't have dropped Kenny, considering they dropped Pred, right? Like, that's just my thinking. Okay, Kenny, he steps down from the team. Were they really not going to drop Kenny after Major 2? If they go 1-6 in the qualifiers, they get top 8 at the Major, and so they drop Pred for Huke. They bring Huke into the roster with Kenny. Does that change anything? There's still going to be the lingering questions about whether Kenny can perform at that level anymore, if this team is any good or not. I just have a hard time that this was going to, like, this might have been the way it went, but like, it just feels weird that Skies is on this team still. Like, he feels like a stopgap, and they haven't addressed that part of it. And maybe they won't. Maybe they think that Skies is the guy for them. But it just, like, Skies and Huke for Pred and Kenny, it, like you kind of mentioned, that's not the roster change I think people were expecting. That's not like the big roster change that you would expect OpTic, who are floundering, to make. And I think that's the biggest point here, is that it just feels kind of empty or incomplete with what OpTic has done so far.
Yeah, I think at this point I would be surprised if Skies is replaced already. I think that was just I mean, I said it whenever we were talking about Skies actually joining the roster. It was just like, it was always going to be a weird situation, because I think the example I used at that time was like, if they get 12th place at Major 2, is it possible Skies just plays one match with OpTic and then you cut him? But like, is that really fair to just play one match on a team that really struggled in the qualifiers and then be dropped? Like, so it was always like, felt like a double-edged sword in my eyes, really, from Skies. He was just in a position where if that happened, it was just going to be the way things went for him. And I think at this point now, it feels like he seemingly is going to be on OpTic for the rest of this season at least. But there is, again, like I said, the dominoes have fallen the other way. And now if this Pred, or even Kenny to some extent, if that causes some other roster move where another AR player becomes available, I guess it's not entirely out of the realm of possibilities that Skies could be replaced. It would. I still don't know how to feel about that, especially with it would literally happen with a 2-match sample size before the Major 3 qualifiers, if a move were to happen there. But I feel like, we talked about it last episode. There's only 5 qualifier matches for Major 3 this time around, and it's just, yeah, the end of the season is quickly approaching, so the time to make roster moves is dwindling, and that's why it feels like, Shotzi, Dashy, Huke, and Skies is going to be the OpTic roster for the rest of the season. But I really haven't had a strong read on this OpTic roster situation all year. I felt like with Pred, we had heard that he was going to he was going home to Australia and then coming back after Major 1, and I felt like it wasn't going to be Pred coming back to OpTic. It was going to be Pred to another team. We talked about C9 a lot at that time, because it felt like that seemed like a good fit based on his previous experience with the players and even coach accuracy on that team. And then with the whole Major 2 situation here, where they're 06, 018, I really felt like they were going to stick it out with the roster, and obviously that's not what happened. So I'm just going to, maybe I have to start thinking the opposite of what I'm thinking when it comes to this OpTic situation this year. But for now, I'm going to say I think this is the 4-man squad we're going to see for the rest of the year, and I guess we'll wait and see if that's the truth or not.
Yeah, I think it's just weird, because if you're following what they've said about Kenny, like it was Kenny's decision to step down. Okay, then Skies was kind of a surprise, right? Like unless he was always the plan after Major 2, right? Like that's my thing is like if you believe that Kenny stepped down on his own accord and it was his decision completely, then them getting Skies was just, we need someone who played in the CDL recently, who has the ability to play here right now, who has the ability to play in the major. And then they pick Skies. That would make me think, okay, Skies is not a long-term solution, or he wasn't planned to be a long-term solution. So if he only played 2 matches with OpTic at Major 2 and gets released, then no harm, no foul. He got whatever opportunity, I guess, and we're moving on. We're going to target bigger fish or whatever the phrase is. But like money should not be a problem for OpTic, so they should be looking at players within the league already and saying which of these players could we target and realistically acquire. I think the number is a lot higher than people would like to admit, because even the teams in like the top 6 are probably going to be open to hearing what OpTic would offer them. Like obviously FaZe is not going to, or like LAT or whatever, but I feel like a lot of other teams would be open to at least listening to a buyout offer from OpTic. I mean, OpTic had to buy out Skies' contract, right? Like unless LAG waived his contract and Skies waived his deal or whatever, like maybe that happened. But from what Skies said was that he had like a month and a half left on his deal, like whatever, right before Major 4 qualifiers, I think he said. So he had a little bit left on his deal, and he had a small buyout is what he said. So they had to spend some money to get Skies. I don't know if that was the right move, if that was just them saying we're going to commit to him long term. I don't know. But I would like to hear if they would be so gracious, I guess. I just want to hear what their reasoning was behind bringing Skies in. Maybe it was just as simple as like a vibes guy, which I think Skies has proven to be like throughout his career. But it's just a weird situation, and I think it lends itself to speculation that there's some kind of beef between different members of the team. And I just go back to one last thing. I just go back to what if they did not perform well at Champs last season? Like, what would have came out at that time about like their collapse at the end of the year and like this team being championship contenders and then falling flat? Like, and then obviously we've seen these roster changes happen since then. Would all of this just happened in like June or July of last year if they didn't have that miraculous run at Champs? That's always something that sticks in my mind.
I think too, another element of this is like, I don't even know if like there really is any beef or if that's the right word to use, but I do think at least for this Major 2 cycle, whatever happened with Huke after Major 1 is in the past now because he's back on the team. But we can't understate the fact they were 0-6 in series and 0-18 in map count. And it's not like this is the Vegas Falcons team that we're talking about who, are minor region players from not from North America competing against North American talent for the first time. These are historic names who, if I had to guess, probably haven't lost 18 maps in a row dating back to when they were playing GBs when they were like 15 or 14. You know what I'm saying? So it's like when things aren't going your way as a team and you're losing, that could lend itself to the situation being a little more volatile than it potentially otherwise would. Because I think, if they were at least winning some maps and losing series 3-2, coming down to the end and having nail biters, maybe they have like a 2-5 or 3-4 series record. Like, I think things are totally different. But I just think the nature of how they were losing and how there was just no wins in sight, that led to this sense of urgency, as you said, and is that has to be a factor that can't be ignored in this whole situation.
Yeah, K Dizzle on the YouTube chat said OpTic needs to come out and give the story behind PRED. I mean, right now, like that would be inappropriate of them now that they've released him to say anything. Like if he wants to talk about it, then I would applaud him for doing it, like whatever it is. But he seemed pretty hesitant in December to talk about it at all. He was very vague, and I said that at the time that it made it worse by being vague. Like, you either talk about it or you don't. Like, I feel like trying to ride the middle a lot of times, even if it is a really sensitive topic, just like I said at the top of the show, it lends itself to speculation and conspiracy theories, and it opens up that can of worms. And especially with this community, like, I love the COD community, but the COD community is not the most mature and like reasoned community in the world. So like, I think people are more prone to latch on to these things and kind of make them out to be bigger than they are, or at least maybe exaggerate some of the details, I guess. But yeah, that's on Pred. If he wants to talk about it, then he should do so. But if OpTic does, then it's going to look bad on them, considering they just released him for the second time in 3 months. But we'll see what happens with OpTic. I'm sure we'll be talking about them quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
During the Major 3 qualifiers, going into Major 3. They are on the bubble to make champs right now, which is not something that we would have thought even during the season. Obviously, they were the number 1 seed going into Major 1, and even after Major 1, like, they get top 8, and I'm thinking, okay, like, that just happens sometimes. Like, OpTic is one of those teams that they're very hot and cold, but I could never have imagined what happened over the last 2 months. But they have a lot of work to do with this new roster that they have. The only other confirmed roster move we have for you guys today is the Miami Heretics. They announced that Super will replace Lucky in their starting lineup. So not like a really big move. Obviously, Super had been in the lineup for Meadows, I believe, due to like a personal reason or like a medical thing in the Major 2 qualifiers. So we've seen Super in the team. Obviously, Miami is also a team, I guess, like OpTic, that is fighting for a champ spot. They did have that really good Major 1 placing, but not one of the most consistent teams in the world. We've talked about Real on this podcast already. Like, people kind of, I guess, talking about like, will he go to OpTic? Will he get picked up by a big team or whatever? But, if he's on the team, they have a chance to make champs, which should be a very important and should be the goal for them. I think like anything higher than that is probably unrealistic, to be honest. Like, they should just hope to get top 8 in the regular season, make it to champs, get some money out of this, get some extra playing time, get some extra attention. What do you think about Super though, coming into Lucky's spot full time now?
Yeah, I believe it was either one of the clips I saw from one of the streams earlier today, or it was in the translation of the Heretics video, but I believe like there was some mention of Super being more of an AR player and getting to come in to his natural role. I think it was in the subtitles on the Heretics roster announcement or not. But regardless, we saw that we got a glimpse of Super in that match where he filled in for medals. But if he is actually more of an AR player and he came in for medals, then that was obviously not like conducive to the role he's used to playing. So it will be interesting to see how he does, filling in a role that he, is more acquitted to based on what we've heard at least. And I just remember in that one match, which, doesn't really matter from a roles perspective, is he played really well in the game 2 search. I can't even, was it against LAG? It might have been against LAG. Can't really remember. I just remember he played well in the map 2 search in particular in his debut. So will be interesting to get a glimpse of Super again with him back in the roster. I think Breaking Point did it's cards for Major 2, and Lucky had some of the worst statistical numbers from the event. They did like the Burger King card or whatever that they've done before, and Lucky was the recipient of that this time around, which means he didn't have a great time at Major 2 statistically speaking. So technically, as long as Super doesn't play that poorly, he would be an upgrade over Lucky. And I can't help but make comparisons here to Real last year for Miami. Real was that mid-season change. Well, they tried to bring in Eric Boom. That didn't work out. Then they went to Real, and it led to gradual success and improvement for the Miami team. And eventually, like you said, they made it to champs, and I think they got fourth or fifth at champs last year. I don't think it was fourth. I think they got fifth or sixth, maybe. Um, but regardless, I just remember last year at the end of the year, they really started to click once Real came into his own and got adjusted to this playing with these guys in the team. So, drawing similarities here, it might take some time for Super playing with these three guys to get used to the system and whatnot. But if he's able to pull off something similar to what Real did last year, he could be a big piece for this team for the rest of the year. So I think it is interesting. I think the move makes sense in that regard, even going forward, regardless of the rumor that was Real to OpTic. That just from a Miami perspective, it really wouldn't have made sense to effectively get rid of your best player unless you're just getting the absolute bag for him. And even then, like you mentioned last episode, like we saw in the past, Seattle was unwilling to do that with Pred, even knowing he was potentially leaving in free agency afterwards. So I think that they will. I don't think Metals is that old, but I don't know much about the Spanish team, but obviously Rencor is in his rookie season. This will be Super's rookie season and Real's second season. So they have a young core there in those three if things work out and to build around going into the future. And that's one thing we've talked about dating back to the Paris Legion and building a team to feed off of your fan base and that your fans of your region and the regionality of your team can support and learn to love and grow with as fans of competitive Call of Duty. And I think Miami's doing a good job of that if things work out here.
The only thing I would do as the Heretics GM or whatever is I would go to Real and say, do you have plans to stay here long term? Like, for the next 2-3 years, do you see yourself being a Miami Heretic? If he hesitates, I'm trading his ass. I'm letting someone buy him out because, I think his stock, at least after this major, especially that LAT match, his stock has not been higher, I think, than right now. And teams are desperate. We're probably going to have nearly, if not half of the league make a roster change within the next week or two. All right. So this is the perfect time to make that move if you're going to make it. If he says, nah, I'm good. We're fine. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna leave. I want to be in Miami. I want to be a Heretic. Then that's how we approach it. We say, okay, hopefully we could work out a contract. That would be the best possible thing to make sure that he's locked in to that contract. But if not, we're just going to hope and pray that he doesn't change his mind, because you don't want to have that Pred situation where I don't think Pred ever really gave them an assurance that he was going to stay and that he was not going to go to OpTic or anything. But at least you wouldn't have we're going to get screwed at the end of this and we're not going to be able to kind of cash out or whatever the case may be. So that would be my read on it. As far as this current roster, I don't see a ton of upward mobility, let's say. This is a team that is kind of capped out at they can obviously get third at a major like they did at Major 1. But let's be real, that's a pretty fluky situation. That's not going to happen every time. They're going to need everything to kind of break right for them to get in that kind of situation. What they're probably going to be consistently would be a top, 5-6 team, at a major. They could get a top 6 thing, a top 6 placing consistently. But right now they're, getting top 8, top 12. They started the losers bracket of this major, so that's not great, obviously, for Miami. And maybe they're able to just kind of raise that ceiling just a little bit with Super coming in for Lucky, but I guess that remains to be seen. We have some reports and rumors, I guess, that are probably more interesting than Miami Heretics roster moves. One is Kenny. That one was very surprising. Ronnie Intel, formerly CDL Scrim Intel, he tweeted that Kenny is being targeted by the Carolina Royal Ravens. Obviously, this would be a really big move. I would be very interested to see how things pan out for Kenny in that kind of environment. Obviously, it seems like he's real good friends with Slasher. They've known each other for a really long time. TJ, I would assume the same for him. Uh, Gwen, I think it would be interesting to see if Kenny could be another mentor for Gwen. Obviously, he's with a bunch of veteran players, and being with Slasher is probably a very good move if you're a young player currently. But Kenny was in a pretty similar situation as like this highly touted young player, and he had some really good vets around him that I think probably helped him come along even further as a player. So it'd be interesting to see if Kenny could help out Gwen even more in that kind of scenario. But Zuma has kind of thrown a little bit of water on this and said that there might be a money issue between Carolina and Kenny, and that he could actually not be signing with the Royal Ravens after all, which is, not as fun. I like the moves. I like the aggression, I guess. Vivid has obviously been like the odd man out if they were to make a roster change for a while now. And, I don't know if Kenny is, especially with what we've just seen of him recently, if he is going to be a massive upgrade over Vivid. But what do you think about Kenny potentially joining Carolina?
Yeah, that's what my overall thinking was before, when it was just the report that Kenny was going to replace Vivid on Carolina. I thought from like a role standpoint, the move makes sense. If you aren't, if you're willing to make this move, if you're Carolina, it means you aren't putting a lot of stock in Kenny's recent performances and you're banking on him coming into your team and being better than what he most recently showed at during the major two qualifiers. Um, and I think, it's not a knock on Vivid to say that if Kenny is playing at the level that we've seen historically, that Kenny is just a better player than Vivid, and he fits that same role of like a someone who can use an AR, someone who can use a sub. Um, you did mention he has the previous experience playing with TJ and Slasher. The last time though, on that 100 Thieves team in Cold War, I believe that was kind of like that didn't go too well, I believe, and that's when I think after that event, or after that season, Slasher was like making the comments that they show on the broadcast during commercials of like Slasher saying in a post-match interview like he taught the LAT kids how to play COD and stuff like that, and I always thought that was a funny interview clip. But um nonetheless, they have that previous experience of playing together, so it makes sense from um all of those angles, and from a role standpoint, kind of like I didn't really think about it, but thinking along the lines of what you said there for Gwen, like, yeah, you'd think Gwen could potentially learn more from Kenny and develop more into a a talented player that Carolina can build around for the foreseeable future, which seems like, that's what they did this past offseason. Unless he gets a big offer from another team, it seems like that's what they would most likely do going into next season, if I had to guess. But that the big thing around Carolina, just in general, from this past major was Gwynn did not play as well on LAN as he did in the online qualifiers, where he's regularly dropping 35, 40 kills and hard points. He just, they had a series against Vegas Falcons that they won, but outside of that, they had 2-3-0 losses, and people were memeing about Gwinternet and all this stuff I was seeing, and talking about that. And I think that's just, you know finding a way for Gwyn to translate his online success to LAN has got to be the key to success for this team. And as you mentioned, like, it always felt like Vivid, at least based on the way TJ and Slasher have played so far this year, it always has felt like, to us at least, that Vivid would be the likely first man out if the team was to make a move. And even if this Kenny deal that was potentially going to happen falls through now, there's at least like the takeaway that we can factor or think about is that Carolina is considering making a move to replace Vivid, whether it's Kenny or somebody else. Um, so going to be interesting to keep an eye on that situation going forward. But I do think whether Vivid stays on the team or not, like the big picture goal for Carolina is going to be trying to figure out how to unlock Gwynn's true potential on land and see what if there's something going on that's just keeping him from not translating those massive numbers we see online to land.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting just because if you're Carolina, you're in a position that you probably weren't expecting to be in at the beginning of the season. And do you change that? Obviously, you feel like you're hitting a ceiling. Like LAT is like the literal ceiling for them. They just keep smacking them down every time they get too high. But they're currently in fourth place. They're only 5 points back from third place in the standings. Like you said, they could improve on land specifically because in the first major they had a really good performance. The second major, not as good of a performance, and they have really, like, if you want to say this, they've left points on the table as a result of that. Like where, Toronto, they have 75 total points from the majors. Carolina has 60 points. So that extra 15 points, if Carolina had 15 extra points, they would clear Toronto for third place. They'd have like a 10-point advantage over Toronto for third. And I think that's interesting because do you mess with that? Do you change anything going with that? And potentially, let's say like do what OpTic did and slide way further than you thought you would by making that change. I think that's where I'm at right now. Like Vivid obviously is the guy. If they're going to make a change, he's going to be the guy, in my opinion, and in your opinion as well. But he's played well enough and he's fit with this team well enough to get them to a point where they seem like they're a solid top 4 team or top 5 team. And if you make that change, could you go down to a 6th place or a 7th place or 8th place team as a result of that? We've seen Carolina in the past look good at times, and in previous iterations, I guess the Royal Ravens, they look good at times and then not good at times, like last year. And I'm just concerned for them, I guess, if they make that change, especially with Kenny being not at the top of his game, at least from my perspective. Like this is probably the worst I've ever seen him play. I don't think that's a controversial statement at all. And you're replacing Vivid for a guy who just dropped the 3rd worst KD of all time in a series and stepped down from a team and right before a major. Like, I don't know. Like, that just seems like a risky move to make. If it was for someone like PRED, I know the roles won't match up and stuff. But, like, if it's PRED, you say, okay, like, I think we can make that risk. Like, we're adding, even if we slide back down, like our potential is so much higher with PRED than Vivid. I don't know if that's the case with Kenny right now. And maybe I'm wrong, but it just doesn't seem like as certain of a move as it might once. Like if you had talked about this at the beginning of the season, I think a lot of people would take Kenny over Vivid. Right now, I don't think you could say definitively that Kenny is going to unlock this team and make them a championship contender by any means.
I do think PRED is an interesting name to consider for this Carolina team if, the Kenny reported deal does fall through, as seems to be the case based on the latest information we have. Might not line up from a role perspective, as you said, but putting PRED on the flex, or even to an extent putting Gwyn on a flex, could be something that change. Well, what if Gwyn to a flex is what's needed for him to take things to the next level? Similarly with Pred, like we know what he's capable of as a main SMG slayer. What if, like, in this game at least, he him we saw most recently his team, how much of a blame you want to put on him or what is up to anybody, but factually speaking, his most recent team did not perform well, even when he was putting up statistically pretty good numbers. what if a role swap for him allows him to go into a team that is playing better and he can just kind of fill in the missing piece and, take his slaying play style. I mean, there's a lot of maps too. Where teams are running 3 subs anyway. Like if you have TJ, Gwyn, and Pred on subs on a map like Vault Hardpoint or Skyline Hardpoint, I feel like that'd be pretty lethal. But obviously we don't know all the details around like contracts and whatnot. So if the money situation isn't working out for Kenny to go to Carolina, it also stands to reason that maybe financially it wouldn't make sense for Pred to join Carolina. I don't know, but it is interesting. I think, before Major 3 qualifiers happen, I do think Carolina is going to make a change, and I think Vivid's going to be replaced. I just don't know if it's going to be Kenny or somebody else.
Yeah, and as far as Pred goes, I haven't seen any real reports on where he might end up. It seems like fans are trying to theorize like him to LAT. I feel like him for Envoy in LAT, and I think that's interesting. But LAT just won 10 straight matches. They lost, I think, 2 maps in all of the qualifiers. They won the minor. Like, they had a bad event. And we just saw from OpTic. What OpTic did after Major 1 was they made a roster move, potentially because they placed poorly at a Major. As far as, like, that goes, you have to think about it in totality. It's about like winning consistently. Atlanta FaZe has had those moments where they have disappointed at a Major. Last year's champs is a good, story for that. Like they get top 6, they don't even make it as far as they always made it to Championship Sunday. They always made it to the top 4. They don't last year. They stick with the roster. Maybe Esports World Cup had a factor in that, but they stick with the roster. They win Esports World Cup, and then they come into this season, I think, with a lot of confidence, a lot of belief in themselves, and they've obviously won 2 majors. Not saying everything is going to go as great for LAT in that regard, but LAT is, in my opinion, the second best team in the league, maybe third if you think Vancouver might be over them, but they're undoubtedly one of the top 3 teams with Envoy in the lineup, and they have the potential to be the best without making a roster change, without Atlanta or Vancouver making a roster change. They have the potential to leapfrog both of those teams and to win champs at the end of the year. They can do all of that without Pred. And like you just said, Pred was performing very well statistically and individually, but his team was not having success. That's not a shot at Pred, but like, what is the point of bringing him in if you feel like you can get it done with this roster? Maybe they don't. I just have a hard time believing that they don't. Like, they've just won 10 matches. They looked unstoppable for a time period. And if you want to say it's online, go ahead, say it's online. But I tend to think that the team that came, 35 points away in a hard point of winning the Major 1 Grand Finals is probably about as good as any other team in the league. And they probably should not make a change. I think you mentioned in the pre-show, but just the rumor or the idea of Pred to C9 would be interesting. That's something we've been talking about basically this entire season because C9 has been disappointing. They're currently in 9th place in the standings, so if the season had ended today, they would not make champs, which is pretty crazy to think about with the talent that they have. Obviously, he has a bunch of former teammates on that team. Accuracy is a coach for them, and he was his Seattle Surge teammate. So maybe there could be a reunion in New York, but I haven't really seen any, solid information about where he could end up, and I think that is incredibly interesting.
I do. On the C9 front, I thought it was interesting listening to Zuma. It was either last night or this morning, just tuning in to listen to what he was talking about. And he mentioned the Pred to Cloud9, kind of like he wasn't saying it's happening, but he was like talking out loud about it and talking through it with people in his chat and whatnot. And he seemed to think like if it does happen, it wouldn't be for Kremp, and it obviously wouldn't be for Sib. Sib's been playing pretty well too, and he was like Kremp's been, in his eyes, they're one of their best players, so he didn't think Kremp would be the move. And that's something we talked about earlier this year, was that it felt like maybe Kremp would be the odd man out in a situation where Pred goes to C9 just because, Pred was a part of the Seattle Surge team with Mac, Sib, and accuracy. So now maybe we see Pred go to C9 in place of Mac, and Zuma was even talking about maybe a potential replacement of Attach, and Attach was in the chat, like, joking about it. And so I don't know. Like you said, we haven't heard anything really, even rumor wise, that's like enough for some of these other people to report on in terms of where Pred is potentially going. But as I said not too long ago, that's the first big domino of this roster mania in terms of official moves, and could cause some other stuff to happen that is not even on our radar at this point.
Yeah, just speculating, but let's say Pred replace Attach. Attach could possibly find his way to OpTic, which felt like it was going to happen at some point in the last few seasons, and it didn't. So that would be very interesting. We'll have to wait and see, I guess. Arcides potentially is coming back to the CDL, the former world champion with Atlanta FaZe and E United, or not with Atlanta FaZe, just with the United, sorry. But he is obviously, no, he actually won with FaZe as well. What am I talking about? He is a 2-time world champion. But obviously he has been in challengers for a little bit now. And the Minnesota Rocker, according to Ronnie Intel, are in talks with Arcides to potentially make a roster change that at least has not been a surprise that Minnesota would be interested in shaking up this team. After a very disappointing Major 2 performance, and now sliding into the 10th spot in the standings, just ahead of LAG and Vegas, which is not a place you want to be. That is not good company, I would say. So Minnesota trying to make a change, potentially bringing in Arcides. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I kind of talked about it very briefly at the end of last episode, but just what we saw from Minnesota really in totality for most of this season, as Paul X has just, whether Minnesota is winning or not, Paul X has been the quote unquote weak link for this Minnesota team. We've seen, I like Paul as a player. He's had other opportunities in the CDL where he came into teams that were struggling, and he seemed to be a temporary fix for some of those teams. But whatever the case may be with this squad, he hasn't had his moment to shine really in my eyes. Gio, Nero, and Estriel, I think, again, my thing with this Minnesota team all year has been I wanted to see Nero and Gio take things to the next level and show they're capable of being superstar slayers. I've been pretty vocal recently in saying I think Estriel has been the best player on this team this year, especially after the Major 1 qualifiers, or maybe just like after Minor 1. Like, I feel like Estriel has just taken things to the next level, and you just can't say the same thing about Paul. And I feel like that's just been the sentiment around him and the community and everything, is that Minnesota needed to make a change and replace Paul. And I thought a move for Fellow would make sense here for Minnesota. It just, another AR player to come in. And Arcides won the most recent Challengers event. So, maybe that pushes him ahead of Fellow in the, priority, the eyes of Minnesota in terms of who they would prioritize making a move for. But obviously, he's got it's two guys in Fellow and Arcides who both have CDL experience. Obviously, Arcides got the world championship, so maybe that gives him an edge too. But end of the day, it's similar players, and in style wise, I feel like, at least based on what we've historically seen, coming into in the case of Arcides, I feel like you know what you're going to get from Arcides. He should be an upgrade in the leadership department, although we heard some early things early on in the season about Paul X, like learning from Crim 6 when he was on New York, about how to be a leader and whatnot. We've literally seen Arcides lead that Atlanta FaZe team as the veteran to a world championship. So, like, you can't even dispute that. Arcides would just be an upgrade in the leadership department there. And, he doesn't have, with the 3 young guys here, he really doesn't have to, do anything crazy from a slaying perspective in my eyes. If he's just a consistent 1.0, or, maybe a little over a 1.0 KD, and the other 3 guys are playing up to the potential that we've seen at different moments, this team could be very scary again. But it's just going to be a case of getting that consistency to where Gio, Nero, and Estriel are all, working together at the same time, because it's great when Gio has a 40-piece pop off, or Nero pops off for 35, or Estriel goes off for 40 kills. But then if one of them isn't doing anything, it's kind of like just counteracting itself. And that's where I feel like a lot of these, at least in my eyes, for Minnesota, it feels like when I'm writing down the notes for their matches and stuff, I'm writing down like, yeah, they lost this hard point. Estriel played pretty well, but Paul X didn't, or insert whatever names you want there. It felt like there was always, um, when somebody was really doing well, somebody else was kind of counteracting it by not playing as well. And I think regardless of what the change is for Minnesota, we don't know if this is confirmed for Arcides, but I do think this move makes a lot of sense from a role standpoint. Should be an upgrade in the leadership department. And if Arcides is able to bring anything to the table with this squad in like from an intangible perspective, I think this is a really good move that could, further the careers of these three guys on the team around him, and make them better players even beyond this season if they truly can, make this work. So I am excited to see this move come to fruition if it does.
So far this season, Minnesota, they finished 10th in the Major 1 qualifiers. They got top 4 at the first minor, and then they got top 6 at the first major. And then they got 7th at the Major 2 qualifiers. They did not. They finished last at the second minor, and they also finished last at the second major, which, that's, like you said, this is a young team and an experienced team, at least relative to a lot of the other teams in the league. And they need something. It's really hard to pinpoint what will take them and kind of consistently move them up the standings or into the hierarchy within the CDL, but it's just not cutting it. Like it just feels like there has to be a change, and Paul does seem like the most logical move to make here. And bringing in Arcides, like you said, he did win the most recent Challengers event, the first Challengers Open in Dallas. He was part of that OMIT team, along with obviously former Minnesota Rocker Standy, Ojani, and Brack. So, and they're being coached by Nagafin, which was pretty cool. So there's, obviously he's performing well in Challengers. I typically think that deserves kind of like a reward, essentially, or at least a look at the very least, I guess, to just see what is going on there, if he could add to this team and contribute. I'm just, obviously I don't follow Challengers, so like the lasting memory I have of Arcides is, his LAG run at the very end, and even the Seattle Surge thing. Like it just didn't go well. Like it seemed like he did not have it anymore for whatever reason, or he just wasn't able to contribute as much as we had seen him previously with, teams like United and FaZe. So I'm just worried that it's going to end up like that, but that's probably just my irrational stuff, like with not older, like he's like probably my age or whatever, but like these former CDL players that have been out of the CDL for a while. Like I feel like a lot of times it's hard for those guys to not recapture what they did, but like be able to contribute in a meaningful way to a new team. We have seen it before. I just don't think it's not a tried and true method. It doesn't work all the time, and that could be my concern with Arcides potentially coming in for Minnesota. Ojani, I believe he played with the Paris Legion at one point in time, if I'm not mistaken.
Was it Paris Legion or Vegas Legion?
It might have been Vegas. Vegas.
I think it was Vegas with. Actually, no. I think it might have been Paris with. He was on the Jimbo team, I think.
Oh yeah, that does sound right. What did he come in for someone last year due to illness? Wasn't that him? Like
maybe, I don't know. I think the.
Let me see.
Last year Clay wasn't on Vegas, but the year Clay was on Vegas, I was thinking of Johnny potentially being on that team, but I think that was too real.
So I'm looking up. He was on Paris Legion and he was on the Vegas Legion. So we're both right here. So yeah, he was on Johnny. He replaced John. I do remember that now. And yeah, he was on the Jimbo team. And then last year, I think he just filled in like the last like bit of the season for Nero, maybe. There's somebody, I think it was at Nonus.
Oh no, you're right. He like stepped down. Yeah,
Oh,
he was
yeah.
he was on the team with Attach, Nero, and Geo at the end of last year, and then he stepped down before EWC, and that's why they had to pick up Fame, I think.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, I got them mixed up. But yeah, he was on both the Vegas and Paris Legion. So he's been in the league before. He hasn't really gotten like he's gotten two chances, I would say, but he got them both with the Legion, and it's like, is that really even a chance at all? Does two chances even equal one chance in a regular team, especially with the Paris Legion? It's just like, I don't know, like he might get this opportunity, and what I'm talking about is him potentially being signed by LAG in place of Lins, which could be a really big and painful move, I guess, for LAG, because obviously they stink. They are the second worst team in the league. Lins has not performed up to expectations or, been anywhere close to, I think we both talked about it, how he could be, not next Hydra, but, in the same vein as just like this next French star. And it just hasn't panned out well for him or the team so far this year. And reportedly, there's been a lot of trepidation and reluctance to make that move to replace him, because obviously LAG partnered or merged or whatever the phrasing is with Gentlemates before the season. So it's the LA Gorilla Mates. And that has given like Gotaga, I would imagine, and this French organization and Gentlemates a lot of influence. And in terms of viewership, they have lived up to the hype. They have delivered on that front. And there's been a lot of enthusiasm from the French fan base as a result of that. And with Lins being one of only two French players, I believe, there's a few French speaking, but I think just him and Hydra are the only French players in the league. So making that move is risky from like a brand perspective, I guess, or like like a PR perspective, if you want to go that route. But in terms of being able to be competitive, maybe this is the move. Obviously, like I just mentioned, Ojani was a part of that Omit team that just won the Challengers Open. So do you think this could be a good move for LAG? We really haven't seen a lot of Ojani, and especially because he's been in Challengers this season, we haven't really seen any of him.
Yeah, I felt like the move that needed to be made for Gentlemates, and obviously we don't know if this is just a one person move or if it's even confirmed at this point, but I felt like just Priesta was going to be the person that was moved, because felt like Kismet has been the best player on the team. The Bulldog's been doing his thing. Felt like Lins was going to be untouchable because of the reasons you mentioned with the French background on the French team, yada yada. And Lunars was just picked up and he's a rookie. So it really felt like Priesta was going to be the odd man out if they made a move. In my head, I thought they would potentially go after someone like Cobra just because of that French background, and potentially going the route of the Heretics and having those players from the regionality to build around, and the fan support, all that. So making a move here, potentially replacing Lins with Ojani from that angle, I agree, that does seem a little strange to me. But from everything I heard, I think it was again in one of the clips on Zuma, like Ojani apparently really popped off in the finals in one of the hard points of the Challengers Open, and that potentially could have been what opened the door for him to make a return to the CDL there. So yeah, I do think it's a little strange. It feels like for Lens to be the guy being replaced. I felt like really early on in the season when this team was struggling with the initial 2023 subliners champs roster plus Lins minus Hydra, I felt like Lins did do a pretty good job of playing pretty well early on. But as this season has progressed, the team just hasn't really reached the levels and expectations that the community and some fans likely had for them with that previous success. for some of the players on the roster. So I don't know. I think this is definitely, if this move goes through, it is, sort of similar to your phrasing with the whole Huke situation. This is a sense of urgency move. If it happens, and it's like a move where they're like, yeah, we're putting aside this, this potential French players, however you want to phrase it, that we can build around from a brand perspective. We're putting that to the side in hopes of changing results around immediately. Um, I don't know for sure how much that will change things, but from Johnny's perspective, we talk about this with numerous players. There are many players who don't get a second opportunity in the CDL after they get an initial shot and things don't work out. And as you were saying, he's kind of had like 2 half opportunities at this point. So he's getting another shot here if this does work out. And it's going to be interesting to see if he, fully grasps it and takes things from here. As someone like Neptune, like I think Neptune's the real example going forward, is a guy who he was in the CDL, showed some promise and potential, but didn't really take things to the next level necessarily. And then he gets this other opportunity and this season with Vancouver, and he has shown what he really is capable of. And he, at least in my eyes, should be a staple on whatever roster, just, going forward for the CDL. So that's got to be like when teams are looking to make moves now, they're like, want to, instead of, I feel like in the past it was like, who's the next simp? And that was kind of like a question of like finding some guy who, Simp didn't really have to do anything in challengers because he turned 18 and was
never
immediately
played.
yeah. So that's not the best example, but now that's like I feel like going forward it's going to be, at least from a challengers perspective, it's like, who's that next Neptune of a guy who, maybe was in the CDL before and didn't have the most success, but then he gets another opportunity and is able to find immediate success with a new squad. So I feel like that's going to be potentially what Johnny's going to look to do, and we'll have to see how he does.
Yeah, it's a bad situation to be in for him. Like, it's great to get this opportunity, but like we just said with Vegas and Paris, like both of those teams are kind of dumpster fires in their own regard. And then now he comes in to LAG, who are the second worst team in the league, and they seem like they're destined to not make champs this season. So like, it's bad for, I don't know, it's like bad for your reputation, I guess, to even be a part of these brands sometimes. Like, I mean, Major Maniac being a very good example. Last year, he comes into that Boston Breach team, and at like near the end of the season, when they're having like the second worst season in CDL history, or it will be third worst after this year, but it's just not good for you. Like it doesn't help your, not your brand, but your stock, I guess. It goes down, or it definitely does not go up when you're with those teams. And but sometimes that's the only opportunity you get, and you have to take those and try to make the most of them and hope that it turns out to be a Neptune situation and people look at you like, oh my God, like we're gonna have to sign this guy and make him a target in free agency over the off season. But that's a lot of wishing and praying, I think. And
Well, I mean, look at Lunars, right? Lunars is on the other end of that here. He was just a couple weeks or a month or so ago, he was talked about as the top AR prospect in challengers, and then he joins this team and in Gentlemates, and it just, it hasn't worked out as well. And how much of that can you blame on him for him joining a team that already was struggling, and he joins the team and they continue to struggle? Like, it's like, it's the card he was dealt, and I still believe in Lunars, and I think, that's why I would have been not a huge fan if Gentlemates decided to make a move to replace Lunars after only giving him like one stage in his rookie year in the CDL. But that's like kind of the opposite of this. The Neptune and Lunars moves were the high. I don't want to say high profile, because obviously the PRED move happened with replacing Huke, but those were like the challengers related high profile moves most recently. And we've seen both ends of the spectrum in terms of Neptune having an instant impact on a team and getting them to the finals, and Lunars joining a team after having massive success in challengers and not seeing those same results in the CDL level. So we've seen it all really this year in that regards, and time will tell where Johnny falls on that grading scale, I guess.
Yeah, I was gonna bring up Lunars. Just like I'm so shocked that LAG did not even think about getting Fellow in as well, like making a 2-person
Yeah,
change at the time and
yeah,
bringing Fellow and Lunars in as a pair, or even like Craze and Lunars because they both play in challengers together. Like I just don't think like it's different with Neptune because Neptune already had played in the CDL with I think 2 teams if I'm not mistaken. So he had like experience at this level before, and like Lunars didn't have any of that, and they brought him in mid-season to one of the worst teams, and then like I don't know, like it just they didn't set him up for success, and maybe he wasn't destined for success. I'll say that. Like maybe he wasn't as good or as he wasn't gonna be as dominant in the CDL as he was hyped up to be. But like I think it's hard to say that they did right by this team and by Lunar specifically by what happened. And now they're going to make another change. Like I think it's just the problem is they decide to make 2 separate changes, 1 person each, and they brought in Priesta again. And it's just like, why not just make a 2-person change at once and just write it out, see what you have for 6-7 weeks, and then make another change if you need to. Like it just felt like the wrong moves to make, and maybe the window is closed now. There's not a way to salvage this situation, but we'll see what happens with Ojani and see if he can make the most of this 3rd opportunity he gets in the CDL. Last thing is just Zuma saying that 2 teams 100% changing, which we've already seen. We've seen at least 1 team, or yeah, I guess we've seen 2 teams already make a change. He said 4 or 5 teams possible, and I was like looking at the standings, and I was like, there's probably more than 5 teams here, to be honest. Like, they're obviously
it's 5 teams based on what we've mentioned so far:
yeah,
OpTic, Miami, Minnesota, Carolina, and LAG.
yeah, and I'm thinking C9 is certainly in that mix. Like I think the only bottom 6 team that might not make a change is Boston, but everybody else will make a change plus OpTic plus Carolina. So like literally 7 teams out of 12 are going to make a change in this next week or 2 potentially.
Yep.
And I don't know, like especially with, like we've talked about it before, and I think this is a perfect way to cap it off is like PRED is the domino. Like if you're looking at someone that is going to potentially change the way that this ROSTERMANIA period goes, it's PRED. Because if he goes to C9, for example, what happens to Mac or what happens to Attach? Where do they go? Maybe they don't get picked up, so maybe that domino won't cause as much chaos as we're thinking. But I think that's a big part of it. Vegas, I think we mentioned on the pre-show, they have made a change because Devoom said he was stepping down, right?
Yep.
So they're going to have to make at least 1 change and replace him. But, I mean, they're just rumors, I guess, that they might just say, screw it, like this team is bad, we're going all in a completely different direction. What would you think of something like that? Like Vegas is, let's just put it out there, they're 0-18. They're 9-54 in map count. To even get to 8th place, they would have to make up a 100-point gap right now. That means that the Miami Heretics and everybody below them, like they don't really do anything basically, and Vegas would have to win at least 7 qualifiers and finish like at a pretty high clip at Major 3 to even kind of get close to them going into the Major 4 qualifier. So what do you think about Vegas potentially, possibly deciding enough with this Saudi team, we're going to go in a different direction here?
That's just based on it seems like Zuma has been heavily hinting that is at least an option being weighed by the Vegas Falcons right now, is that they might move on from the Saudi experiment, at least in the CDL, maybe move the Saudi team to the Challengers or Academy project, and bring in a team of at least some North American talent and maybe keep Exton around. Um, Again, nothing solid reported on yet or anything like that, just rumors at this stage. But I feel like um, that's kind of I brought it up whenever we were talking about Luti being released by Vegas. Like it felt like early on this season when they initially struggled, it felt like the organization was like, yeah, we're remaining committed to this Saudi project. And then with Luti being removed from his role after even more years of service with the organization and just a past relationship that dated prior to the Vegas Falcons joining the CDL, it felt like that was like the first opportunity or just eye-opening moment of like, hey, maybe this Saudi project is gonna be put on the back burner for now. Um, so we, like I said, don't have anything solid or concrete to go on here, but we in other esports, the Falcons have thrown the bag, for lack of a better term, at some pretty talented players in other games, and someone like PRED, he's out there as a free agent right now. What's technically stopping them from being like, yeah, we're just gonna pick up PRED and give him a chance to you know, turn things around on the Vegas Falcons, and even maybe imagine a team of Kenny and Pred on Vegas Falcons. They just go after both of them. That'd be interesting. But yeah, all speculation at this point. We don't know for sure what's going on with Vegas Falcons. I do have to say, for their lack of success in series and whatnot, they had been one of the organizations that's been pretty transparent, at least on social media and stuff, in terms of like at least releasing statements and whatnot when they're making moves. So I'm not going to be surprised to hear that Vegas is making a move. I just don't know what the exact roster change is going to be at this point.
Yeah, I think it should just be noted at least that like Zuma knows Clay really well, obviously.
Yeah.
And Zuma also knows Asim really well, and Asim is on the Falcons Academy roster, so I'm sure he would have some knowledge, or he would know something about like what Vegas is planning to do with their roster if he is on the academy team. Like, so like there's like the fact that Zuma is saying it, I feel like there's a lot more weight behind it than just a regular player saying like, oh, they should replace these guys, or like they're close to. Like, I think Zuma probably has a pretty good idea of what may happen, and maybe they'll change their mind. Like, there's always that possibility. I don't think like this is anything near a guarantee that they're going to do this, because I think if you get rid of the Saudi roster, then that's just you admitting that this was a failed experiment and everything went wrong with this. But you should have like a good backup plan if you're going to do that, right? Like, if you're going to say that we screwed up with the Saudi team, then you should have a really good team to replace them with, or it's just going to look really bad to bring in a challengers level team that, they're probably going to be better than Vegas, the current Vegas team, but they're not going to compete for anything, and they're just going to be at the bottom of the standings. Like, I just don't think that's going to do anybody any good. But we'll see what happens, I guess.
I do think for, we don't have to spend too much time on Vegas, obviously, but I think moving on from the Saudi roster in the CDL isn't necessarily an acknowledgement of a failure. Just, obviously they haven't played well, but I think it was very ambitious from the start to have guys who didn't even compete at the top level in North American challengers to go right into the CDL. It's like it'd be like skipping a step in, going from high school football to straight to the starting quarterback in the NFL, right? Like something, it was a massive leap for them to be in this position to begin with. And I think if some of these guys go down and compete in challengers now, it's very possible they have some success. I'm not saying they're going to win the next challengers event, because, they've been struggling to win maps in the CDL, but they might, be more competitive in challengers. And, they've been there was the whole thing of teams not wanting to scrim them and whatnot, but based on what we know, they in theory have been getting pretty good practice, even if it hasn't been leading to map wins at the CDL level. So I think moving the roster down to challengers, seeing what they do there, and then deciding what next steps are for the project from that point is what I feel like is the move the org should make. I don't know if that's where we're going or not.
Yeah, maybe that is the way. Like they just essentially turn this CDL team into an academy team, and they move them obviously down to challengers, let them continue to develop, and then maybe just one by one bring them up to the CDL roster when it's ready, or you could sell them off, or trade them or whatever when the time comes, or if that time comes. But I don't know. It's a weird situation, especially we see what Miami is doing, and they've seemed to like whatever happens, like we're gonna go with these guys. Like we're a Spanish team through and through, even our substitutes, and we're not gonna change that. Which is it's a bold strategy. There's gonna be criticism, but they have to get to a certain level before that criticism starts to fall off. And right now, like obviously that they're not there yet. Last thing is the maps. So this week, the CDL announced that Search and Destroy maps will be changing. So there will be no more Skyline or Vault S&D. In their place will be Rewind and Dealership. Obviously, Rewind coming back in to the CDL map pool. I saw, as positive of a reaction as you can get, I guess, for the COD community. What do you think about these moves?
Yeah, I saw a lot of people saying that Dealership is not a great map, but I think the overall consensus right now is that Skyline and Vault S&D were just very they were one bomb site heavily favored offensively maps. I definitely worded that wrong, but it's getting late and brain's fried. So they were just maps where most teams were finding success on offense, good teams, and they were doing it by continually hitting the same bomb site over and over again, planting the bomb in the same one on Vault, the site in the Vault, I'm pretty sure it's A, and on Skyline that bomb site by P3 by the pool and not up in the little office by P2. So at the very least, like a map like Rewind, we've seen it. They're definitely, I think the bomb site in the like movie shop is a little more favored than the bomb outside, but it was a map where we definitely in its limited time saw the bomb planted more spread out and not just consecutively at the same bomb site all the time. Even though it definitely did feel like that inner bomb site was a little more favored, but I think at the end of the day, it's going to change things up. I did see something that like Toronto had 100% win rate on Vault and Skyline S&D. So for a team like Toronto, this is a change that they probably are not super fond of because it's getting rid of two maps they literally haven't lost yet. But for some of these other teams, it'll be interesting to see what kind of strategies and stuff we see. And even if these maps aren't the best at the end of the day, they're replacing maps that many people already considered not the best S&D maps ever to begin with. So at the very least, it'll just be a new change of pace, and it'll be interesting to get to see a new map in rotation with Dealership.
Yeah. And yeah, that about does it. We're about an hour and a half in now. And we will continue the conversation about the major. Obviously, the ROSTERMANIA portion of the show took up most of the show today. But if there's not a lot of roster news, then on Sunday, we'll probably break it down. Actually, we might not have a show Sunday night. I will let you know on that. But yeah, either way, the next show that we do will certainly talk more about the major. We were planning to talk about more like Carolina, Minnesota, LAG, Miami. We talked a little bit about them, but we didn't really get to go any deeper into that. But we plan to talk about C9, Boston, Toronto, Vegas. So, we barely touched on some of those teams just because when you're not involved in ROSTERMANIA actively, then you kind of get put to the back burner at least for one episode. But we'll definitely get there. We have a little bit of time until the Major 3 qualifiers start back up and then we get the matches going again. Make sure to like, subscribe, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube. You can watch the live streams of the podcast on YouTube or Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers. The podcast tour is at Ego Chall Podcast. You can also follow Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. And the next show will be to be determined. I'm going out of town on Friday, so I should be back Sunday, but we'll see what happens. But we will definitely have a show for you in the next 6 or 7 days, I guess. And we'll be back to talk about all things Call of Duty esports. That does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys as always for all the support. It was pretty fun talking about the roster stuff today. Like Preston said, didn't go too into the nitty gritty on like the majors, but I was I did try to thread in some stuff about the results, and I think for the most part, for at least the teams we were talking about making changes or reportedly potentially making changes, like their performance at the major or lack thereof is part of the reason why they're considering changes. So I think it's all connected, and especially considering we already talked for an hour and a half, I think we did a pretty good job of talking about everything we needed to. So it should be, at the end of the day, we talked about some reports and stuff, but we did only have the 2 confirmed moves for PRED, Huke replacing PRED on OpTic and Super replacing Lucky on Miami. So at the end of the day, we at least, there are reports and stuff going around right now, and unless there's a world where none of those reported moves come to fruition and all the teams stand pat, we're going to have official news on some roster moves before the next time we go live, most likely, and we'll be here to break it all down for you. So until then, we'll see you whenever we are live again, and remember to send the chow.